Caleb, what's happening, buddy?
Not much. How are we doing?
I'm good, man. I was we were just talking about this in the kitchen, right? And it's we do a lot, especially when we're working with just single doc one practice, right? Controller level services, especially, we're diving deep, looking at, and do this in bookkeeping as well, I guess. But we're looking at that specific practice that doctor owns to industry standards, right? Industry benchmarks. We've got industry benchmarks that we use. That's like, here's what an average practice does. And when I'm saying these metrics could go all over the place, but we're looking at the financial data, a lot of times with overhead, but then we're diving deeper on KPIs. But we kind of say, hey, what an average practice looks like on a lot of these metrics. And then we say, man, what a high performing practice looks like. And we're comparing that practice's data to those industry benchmarks. But what I want to talk about today is just like in the group practices that we work with and a lot of the fractional CFO clients that we work with, we not only, do that as well, but we take it one more step further because we don't just have one practice. We've got multiple practices that we can use. So let's just dive in a little bit. Now that you have group practices, what additional stuff, I'll just use that word stuff, are we looking at and comparing those things against to see how the practices are doing?
Yeah, so, the overhead categories themselves aren't going to be super drastically different right now,
Sure.
Solo versus a group. But where we take it a step further, especially on the fractional CFO services, and to an extent the controller level services, if there's a group practice, really looking at comparing practices against each other within the portfolio to tell you who are your leaders and who are your laggards.
Okay.
And we believe that's super important. We have practices. Well, let me take a step back. We have dentists that come to us, and it's, that flagship dilemma we talk about quite often, right? Hey, I got
Get that big bad practice, right?
one practice that's kicking butt, that's doing super well. It often sends dentists down the journey of groups, right? Hey, I'm doing this great here. Why don't we just copy and paste and do it 6 times and make 6 times more money, right?
Right.
If it is that simple, everyone would be doing it. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. But, we take a look at each practice individually compared up against each other to give us an idea of, hey, what's working in this practice that's not working over here? We start looking at this as a team effort, a portfolio. If we're able to produce in one, what are those characteristics? What are the circumstances? What are the variables going on in our top 1 or 2 practices that we need to attribute to our, I'm going to call them laggard practices, right?
Yeah.
Is it the personnel? Is it location? Is it, whatever the case may be? There's a lot of variables to go into it. We don't have time to get into all that today, but the importance of it, knowing, hey, what's working, what's not working, right? It points out those 2 things. But then also it gives us the ability to look at, this term I'm going to call contribution margin, which means, what practices are actually contributing to the overall portfolio's value.
Okay.
So what practices are kicking off profit? What practices are kicking off cash that may be hiding the sins of some other practices that are actually putting cash in my pocket as an owner? Just gives us a lot of insight into how our portfolio is producing as a whole and where the strong pillars are in our portfolio and where the laggards may be.
So you kind of look, I'm going back to my college days here, right? You kind of look at it back. You remember in college you did those group projects?
Oh, yeah.
You would have 4 or 5 people that was part of a group project. You always had like this 1 or 2 people, which was not me, but the 1 or 2 people that were like doing 60 to 70% of the work.
Yep.
And you had the other 3, which was me, that was doing like 5 to 10% of the work. So stupid analogy, but like that's how much everybody's contributing to the whole project. Same thing on contribution margin, which I absolutely love this metric, because I think it's so easy for a group practice owner to be like, hey, I got 5 practices, right? And I'm doing whatever. 5 practices, I'm doing $10 million, right? I'm going in the right direction, man. All these practices are just humming. And then when you go in and say, well, can we dive in? We need to dive in and see how each of these practices is contributing to the overall thing. They're like, well, no, we don't need to do that. I think the reason they don't want to do that is they know that you've got those laggers But the true power is when you put those things, because you guys do this every month, right?
Yep.
Are you looking at this data every month?
Yep. Each month we're taking, the month-to-date financials, year-to-date financials, and comparing up practices. And then on the KPI side as well, right? May have a practice A where doctors are producing $6,500 a day and practice C is producing $3,200 a day. Well, that's an issue, right?
Right.
What's causing that? Why is this practice not kicking off the numbers we expect it to? And to kind of go back on your point, the other alternative in a scenario we often see quite a bit is, kind of going back to my original statement of, hey, I have one practice that's doing really, really well.
Right.
Let's copy and paste that 6 times, make 6 times more money. Well, we start with 1, we get to 4, 5, 6. Our revenue's gone up 12x, 10x, right?
Right.
But my cash flow hasn't changed.
Right.
Why? I'm doing 10, 12 times more revenue than I was. Well, when we uncover, take a peek under the hood, to use your analogy, we notice that those practices that are kicking butt, that are bringing in profit, well, that's all just getting swept over to cover the sins of the other practices. So, yeah, we've increased our revenue 10x, but falling down to the bottom line, we haven't seen any difference than when we had 1. So we've got 6x the headache, 6x the amount of work we got to, put in on the admin side of things.
Yeah. Well, the best thing I like about this is, putting it right in front of your face, right? Which practices are doing good, which aren't bad. But I think the biggest benefit, let me know if you agree or disagree, but I think one of the biggest benefits of looking at that data is then taking that data and saying, okay, this is what I need to focus on, right? And it's figuring out what has the most, what needs to be focused on to provide the most value to actually make a difference in the whole thing.
Those key areas of focus.
That's
right?
it.
And that's what we're harping on each month, right? Because when you start getting to 5 practices and up, $10 million top line and up, we don't have time to go through every line item. We don't have time to look at every single little metric as an owner or a C-suite, right? Our job at that point is to delegate to team members that allow us to keep things humming in the areas that are humming.
Yep.
And we remove obstacles in the areas that need focus. That's where, 80-20 rule, right? We need to focus on the areas that need to be focused on, things that are maintaining themselves. We need to go delegate and let the team run that.
100%. That's a Pareto principle, right? Or what they talk about. And if you've got one practice, you've got a ton of problems.
Yep.
If you add 4 practices to that, now you've got 5 tons of problems, right?
Yep.
And so it's so easy to just focus on all these little things, little fires that come out. Like, man, we got to fix this. We got to fix this. We got to fix this. There's only so much time in a day, right? So much time in a week, a month. You need to figure out where you can focus your time on to fix the issues that's going to make your business better. And by looking at all your practices against each other, things are going to, I would say things could stick out pretty easily once you do it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's an issue. I have no idea that was an issue. And they got to stick out like a sore thumb, right?
Yeah, they do. It's amazing when we work with a client who hasn't looked at, well, one, just good, clean data in general, but when you start stacking it up against each other, and you kind of see that come to Jesus moment, or the owner's eyes just open up, and it's like, I've always kind of had that gut feeling, right? Of like, something's wrong over here, just can't pinpoint it, and I don't know why, this practice can't be like the others. Well, here it is, like, black and white, super simple. You just got to look at the data.
Yeah, I'm feeling a lot of what we're getting ready to start working with a new client, right? And several practices, and I have some feelings maybe once we dive in and start doing it. It's like, oh, I told you so. I told you this one was not doing very good. So anyway, I think the big takeaway here for me is, of course, you can't do this if you just have one practice. You can compare them up to other practices, right? They're just maybe ones you don't own. You can do that, find buddies that will share data with you, or figure out a group to be a part of or something like that. But if you have group practices, this is an absolute must that you are comparing them up against each other, because if you aren't, you don't know the good ones, you don't know the bad ones. You might think you do, but until you get good data in front of you, you don't know what to focus on to get better.
Yeah, and I'll give owners the benefit of the doubt. 9 times out of 10, they can tell us
For sure.
the problem children.
For sure.
But when you ask them, well, what is the problem? I don't know.
So they know the good ones and the bad ones, of course, but they don't know what they need to focus on to fix it.
Correct.
That's the key.
Correct.
All right. Contribution margin. What you guys, enterprise rankings, that's what you guys say. You know, to match them up against all the groups. So key things to do if you guys are group practice owners out there and aren't doing that. Put a system in place. Look at it every month. What gets measured gets managed. You will get better because of it. So love it, buddy. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, you bet.
All right, we'll see you.